our guest expert today, her name is Skye McBride, and she's a graduate student at the University of Ottawa studying biochemistry. So she's going to tell us a bit more about that today. But I'd like to officially welcome both our camps. Unfortunately, Woodstock isn't joining, but they're watching the live stream. So hello, Ancaster and London. Awesome. So today is the STEM Stuff Day at STEM Camp, and campers are making a range of different projects, including water filters. They're learning about heat and light from the sun, building and flying some kites if it's not raining, hopefully not, and also learning about the density of liquids. So a little bit of everything. And Skye's going to tell us more about what she does as a graduate student and a little bit more about what biochemistry is and what she studies. So I'll turn it over to you, Skye.
Perfect. Hey guys, hope it's going well there. It's pouring rain here, so hopefully you guys get to fly your kites. So I just want to start off by telling you guys a little more about what biochemistry is. You've probably heard of biology and chemistry. Biochemistry is sort of combining the two. So what's going on in our bodies, all the chemical reactions, and basically how we're able to carry out all our daily activities that we need to do to function. Specifically, the stuff that I study and the people in my lab look at is how we're able to make energy. So we look at what kind of foods we eat during the day and how we can convert them into energy that we can use to carry out activities like going out and playing soccer, or playing with our friends at the park, or even converting it into brain energy when we're at camp or school trying to learn something. And as a graduate student, I'm lucky enough to every day get to come into the lab where I am right now and do some research. So we get to come in and take some samples and look at them and try and answer some really important questions that the world wants to know the answers to. One of the projects that I wanted to talk to you guys about today is really exciting. And what it is we look at different people and how they are able to lose weight. So we take different groups of people that have tried to diet and aren't able to lose weight through different types of means, so either trying to exercise or reduce how much food they're taking in, or a combination of both. And we actually study these participants in our lab. We bring them in and we get samples from them, and we do lots of cool determinations. So one of the first things that we get to do is we take out little pieces of muscle from their leg, and we can actually grow their leg muscle in the lab and do different experiments to see what the differences are between people who might be able to lose lots of weight when they diet versus people who have a really hard time losing weight. So actually one of my colleagues here in the lab today is actually growing some of these cells. So I'll show you. She's over there in the cell culture hood. So she's actually taking some cells and doing a couple different treatments. So she wants to see how each of these individuals respond differently when they have different types of things. So if they give them maybe something to make energy that contains lots of fat or sugar or protein, and see how the actual tissue we get from these patients is able to use this to make energy. And if they can do it efficiently, or if they're storing it as fat and gaining weight. Another thing we do is we take this tissue and we can put it in these cool machines over here. Let me see. Over here. And we can actually measure the tissue growing in the machine and get measurements out on a computer to tell us some information on how they're using this energy. So after we bring in our participants and get all this data, we sit down and we spend days looking at it and interpreting it and trying to find all the little differences that we can so we can talk to other researchers in the field and see what they've found and be able to combine it to come up with an idea of maybe how we might be able to take people that need to lose weight and don't know the best strategies and help them become successful in changing their lives and having a healthy lifestyle and maintaining a healthy weight on their diets, and perhaps introducing exercise that complements what they're eating very well. So that's one of the cool things that I get to do every day. And then basically I'll work on this for 2 years. So I'm just coming up to my 2-year mark now of doing my master's degree, and I have to write a big paper on it. So I have to take all the information that I know about the patients, all of the things that I did with their samples, and all of the results that I found from my experiments, and put it all together in one big document and present it to a group of people and answer their questions on the research that I've done.
Oh, cool. That sounds like some really important research and a lot of fun too. So for our questions for you, let's start in London. Is there a camper with a question for Skye in London? Hi.
Hi. How do you know how many protons, neutrons, or electrons are in an element?
Are in an element? Well, most of the elements we work with in our lab are ones that scientists have discovered many, many years ago. And so way, way long time ago, one of the researchers did some studies to figure that out. And so we already know that, and that doesn't change.
Okay, thanks. Let's
Good
go
question.
to Ancaster for our next question. Ancaster, is there a camper in Ancaster with a question for Skye? Okay.
What is the most difficult part of studying DNA?
The most difficult part of studying DNA? I would say the most difficult part for what we do is trying to not get your own DNA in the sample that you're working with. So lots of time we're working with things, and we have to make sure that we're wearing lots of protective equipment. So we've all got our lab coats hanging on the door over there. If this reaches, we've got boxes of gloves that we have to wear as well. And this is to protect not only ourselves from the samples we work with, but also the samples that we're working with from ourselves. Because if my friend Fiona over there is growing cells and, she cuts herself and part of maybe some of her blood or skin or something goes in the sample, then she's going to be growing her own cells and not our patient cells that we want to work with. So when she tries to get DNA from her sample, she might not be studying something that's completely pure. I think that would be the hardest thing about studying DNA.
Oh, yeah, good question. And that's an interesting answer. I never thought of protecting the samples from the scientist. I usually thought of it the other way around. So cool.
Both are very important.
Yeah. Let's go back to London. Is there another camper with a question for Skye?
What different cells do different things in the body?
There's a lot of different cells in the body, and each different cell type has their own special roles. So a lot of things that we can think of that you guys might be familiar with is maybe skin cells that offer our body protection, keep moisture in, maybe blood cells that are important for delivering oxygen, muscle cells that help us run and play outside, lung cells that help us breathe and, be able to get oxygen into our blood. Pretty much all the different types of organs in our body that you can think of have their own special cell type that use DNA, the same DNA, but in different ways so that they can carry out specific functions that they need to.
Oh, so lots and lots of different types of cells. Good question. Let's go back to Ancaster now.
How do you study DNA?
Pardon me?
How do you study DNA?
Well, I'll give you a little demonstration. I don't have any DNA to work with right now, but take tools in the lab, something like this, that are able to measure little, very precise amounts of liquids and samples, and we use them to pick up the sample that we want, and we transfer them into little tubes like this that we can put in machines that can look at the DNA and give us information about them. So we mix all the chemicals and the DNA and the sample into this little tube, and then we can run our experiment on it.
Cool. So, Skye, in your research working with muscle tissue, does DNA factor in at all for how you study?
So DNA is like the blueprint of life. It gives our body all the information it needs to make everything that our body needs to function. Specifically for studying our muscle, we're looking at the ability to make energy. So our DNA tells our cells to make certain things called proteins, and some of these proteins are involved in taking things we eat like hamburgers and french fries and salads and ice cream, all these different things, and converting them to the energy we need to carry out all our daily activities. And so differences in the DNA, maybe like small mutations or different ways that our cells might use the DNA between maybe me and someone else, can tell us how someone can maybe burn more or less energy, or maybe store more fat instead of burning it as energy.
Okay, yeah, cool. So let's go back to Ancaster for another question. Is there a camper with a question for Skye and Ancaster?
What area of DNA do you study?
We study, well, DNA is really long. Let me start with that. It's a really, really big molecule. But we study the parts that are important in making energy. So some of that is found in the DNA we think of that is the blueprint for our cells, but then we have a special little bit of DNA that's in another part of the cell called the mitochondria, and that's where we make our energy. And that little bit of DNA also is very important to make the things we need to break down the foods we eat, to make the energy we need for our daily activities. So we study parts of the big strand of DNA and then most of the DNA in the mitochondria for making energy to carry out our daily activities.
Okay, this is sort of a related question that was submitted on Twitter. Our campers want to know, what are the uses of DNA? So you sort of mentioned it can determine how we metabolize energy. I guess the list is pretty long if you think about how big DNA is.
The list is pretty endless. So I was talking about how we use DNA. DNA is like a storybook or maybe instructions on how our cells can make these proteins. And while I work with the proteins that help make energy in our body, there's proteins that do anything and everything you can think of. There's proteins that help deal with maybe cooling a cell off when it's under a heat stress, or maybe if it's stressed out in another way, can help increase the amount of other proteins that we need to deal with that stress. As well as there's even proteins that make proteins with the DNA. So the list is pretty endless. Anything that our body needs to do, it mostly uses proteins to do, and the DNA is like the storybook or instructions on how to make these proteins.
Yeah, that's a really cool way of thinking about it. Puts it in a bit of a context of the possibilities that DNA has.
Yeah.
So that's all the time we have for our call today. I'd like to thank you very much, Skye, for taking the time to call into our STEM camps and answer all our questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the great questions, guys. Bye.
Yeah, those were good questions. Thanks, everyone.